have another exciting session with Tarek, Reda. As you know, last week was not even last week, Monday. The focus of the session was growth marketing foundation and acquisition. Today is focused on retention and product-led growth. So again, Tariq has a lot of interactive elements within the presentation. He will ask you to fill up a couple of Slidos here and there. As always, we like to see your faces, guys. I can see over 26 participants in the room. Majority have the cameras on, only a few, actually no, half and half have on and off. So please open up your cameras. We'd like to see your faces. We'd like to see you interacting, hopefully not sleeping on the side. So please open up your cameras. We like to see reactions. If Tariq said a funny joke, he likes to see smiles. So come on, give Tariq the time of day.
Yes, please.
Tariq, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Thanks, Mariam. All right, we have a lot to cover today, guys. So let's get straight into it. So today we're going to be talking about retention and product-led growth. As always, head over to Slido, use this code and enter your startup's name. And let's start with the first question. What is the one thing you remember the most from our previous session, or the thing that really stuck out for you? Let's try and get as many of you guys here using Slido. Okay, great. Come on, guys, this should be easy. Let's get this number up to 10, at least. ICP loops, use case maps, ladder loops. Let's start metric. Okay. Ladder loops, use case map. Okay. Cool. Do you guys feel like you can start working on some of these concepts if you haven't already? Yep. All right, let's get one more. Come on, guys. It's 25 of us. Let's get at least 10. Okay, raw star. Great. We made it. Thank you, guys. All right. Okay, so what we're covering in the first half, so as I said, retention. So we're going to look at the importance of retention and why we should care about retention. We're going to look at the retention stages and why it's important to be able to track and have the level of segmentation. And finally, we're going to look at habit loops, okay? All right, let's do this. So going back to the user journey that we've laid out in the previous session. So last time we spoke about acquisition, and you'll see in the user journey that the bulk of the journey really happens under the umbrella of retention. So within retention, you have the three sub stages of activation, engagement, and resurrection. So that's what we're covering in the first half. Now, again, going back to the use case map, if you guys remember the 5 variables, so the fifth one, frequency. So your retention activities, or at least a portion of your retention activities, are going to be based around that. We're going to be stemming from the natural frequency that you've identified, right? And you've seen how the frequency is important in a few things. One, in defining the North Star metric, so having the right frequency there, but also in your retention activities. When you're going to be building your retention activities, knowing the natural frequency is very important because then you can nurture that frequency, right? And get everyone that has low frequency to that average frequency. All right. So just defining retention in very simple terms, it's the amount of active users over a period of time. Now, notice I've highlighted here a couple of parts of this. So one is the word active, and the second is the time period. And the reason why is because when you're looking at retention, you will always need to look at retention in terms of a specific action, right? So when you're looking at the activity, you need to define what is the action that you're measuring retention against, meaning in plain English, what you're trying to do is You want to, when someone comes to your product, you want to measure the number of people that come back to the product, right? So come back to the product can be one action, just coming back, but you can also measure attention against users that come back and take specific actions within the product, right? So not just coming back, not just logging in, but also taking a specific action, right? So the reason why here I'm highlighting this is because you need to, when you're looking at a retention report, you need to first decide on what is the activity that you're measuring retention against. And the second thing is the period of time, because you want to be able to measure retention of, let's say, month one, and then month three, month six, month 12, meaning that when someone comes today, what's the percentage of users that remain basically coming back to the product after, let's say, whatever period of time. Okay, so just keep in mind these two components, and we're going to touch on that in the coming slides, and you have a better understanding. All right, so that's the simple definition. Now, let me ask you guys, which of the following do you think is more important in growing your business? So if you had a, if you had to pick one, right? Obviously, both play a role, but if you had to pick one, which one would you do you think is more important in growing your business? Let's see, team acquisition versus team retention. All right, cool. So most of you guys are agree on acquisitions. Let's still go. All right, so let's see what we're referring to here. Now, of course, acquisition is important, right? Acquisition is necessary to, bring new users. But the thing is, if you look at the fastest growing companies across any sector, you'll see that retention is really the key ingredient to their success, right? So retention really is the thing that separates the top 1%. If you look at social networking apps, and this is slightly kind of older data, but you can look at Facebook compared to X and back then Twitter and Snapchat. You'll see how the market cap, or the retention actually, correlates with the market cap. Facebook has a much higher market cap, much bigger market cap, but you can see the retention is much higher than these guys. If you look at the net revenue retention in 2023 for some of these B2B companies like HubSpot and CrowdStrike and Asana, all of them have very, very high net revenue retention. If you look at mobile applications, you'll see that the top 10 apps in terms of user base have much higher retention rate compared to the following batches, right? So you see here retention rate much higher than these guys, and that's top 10%, top 10 apps on Android. So retention, if you look at it from any angle, you'll see that it correlates with faster growth and just success overall and building user base. Now, let's look at this in terms of numbers. Just very quickly, looking here at a scenario, a hypothetical scenario where you plan to drive 10,000 new users every month, right? So you're running whatever acquisition campaigns that you're running, and every month you're bringing 10,000 users, right? So by the end of the 12 months, if you're looking at this linearly, you would end up with, on paper, 120,000 users in 1 year. But of course, the reality is when you factor in retention, you'll see how it's different. But if you look at this, just theoretically, this means that in 1 year you have 1,100% growth of users, right? But of course, when we factor in retention, which is a fact, there's no denying it. You will lose users over a period of time. So if you factor retention in and look at, let's say, average retention, you might end up from the 120,000 users, you might end up with, let's say, 16,000 actually users that are active, right? Which means that you're losing the vast majority of users. And that's the case for a lot of businesses, especially when they're starting out, until you ramp up your performance and you get to a point where your retention is higher. But really, then in this case, you started with 0 and you grew to 16,000. So really, you only have you brought the first month 10,000, now you ended up with 16,000. So that's a 60% user growth in 1 year, right? Not 1,100. And that's, of course, the reality. Now, if you work on your retention, if you tweak your retention and raise it up from, let's say, 15 to 20 to 30 to 40, you can end up with a much bigger number of active users by the end of year one. So instead of having 16,000 active users by the end of the year, you can end up with 30,000. It's just plus 200% user growth in 1 year. And this is not you going out and bringing new users or spending on an acquisition. This is you simply having better retention of the users that you already brought. Okay, and of course, if you scale that longer, you can see how that can have a huge impact on your overall user base growth. So retention is super important. Now, one of the ways that you can measure retention, there are more than one method, but this is a very straightforward and easy way of measuring retention, is using the retention curves. Okay, so retention curve, simply what it does is, what it says is that on day zero, so let's assume that here, this point is day zero. So here is the days from acquisition, and this is the percentage of active users. You can look at this daily or weekly or monthly, but let's assume in this case, we're looking at daily, right? So you have, let's say, 100 users that came on that day. So this retention curve simply tells you that over time, what is the percentage of users that you're retaining, the ones that keep coming back to your product, okay? Like I said earlier in the slides, when you're measuring retention, you need to define what is the action or the type of activity that you're measuring retention against. So let's say in this case, we're looking at just simply someone coming back to your product. But you can also look at this retention curve in terms of people that come back to the product and take a specific action within the product. Okay, so regardless what the action may be, but essentially you end up with the same report view. Okay, so this means that on that day you lost, let's say, 70%, 75% of users. On the following day, you lost more users. On the following day, you lost more users. Basically, over time, you keep losing users. Now, here's the thing, though. This blue line, when it reaches zero, when it reaches the floor, this means that you've lost 100% of the users that came on that day. This is bad. You do not want this for your business, okay? So essentially what this blue line shows is that you have a leaky bucket. Your product, you're bringing users to your product, and at some point you're losing 100% of them, okay? What you want to be doing is you want to try and flatten your retention curve. So you want to get to a point where this retention curve flattens, because when it flattens, it means that, let's say it flattens at 40%, this means that you are retaining 40% of your users on the long run, okay? And again, you can look at this in terms of different cohorts. So let's say month one, month two, three, month six, month 12, etc. Okay. All right. Now, these are a couple of tools that can do that. So any product analytics tool can do that for you. So things like Mixpanel, Amplitude, or June, or these guys, they can all give you these reports out of the box. So all you need to do is just, track the events in your product, and you'll be able to see these reports right away. Now, the nice thing about this report is that you can look at the overall users, but you can also start slicing and dicing the data. Okay, so you can then look at these retention curves by different cohorts. Okay, so for example, you can look at you can split that by user segments. So let's say you have different segments. Let's say in the case of Behja, let's assume that you have tenants, you have landlords, and real estate agents. Let's assume that these are three segments of users that use your product. You can then start looking at the retention curve by user segments. Okay, so you'll see that, for example, tenants might have much higher retention than landlords versus real estate agents. And the point of this is that you're basically what you're doing with this slicing and dicing data is you're trying to understand what is the root cause of the problem. Okay, so if you're trying to improve the overall retention, you want to try and dig deeper into the data and pinpoint the areas or the units or the segments that need improvement, right? So you might see that real estate agents have low retention, much lower retention than the rest. And if these guys constitute a big chunk of your users, or at least a sizable chunk of your users, then you need to do something about this segment, right? To think of ways of how to retain these guys better. You can also look at this in terms of traffic sources. So let's say Property Finder. So you can look at the retention of users that are coming from different sources. So let's say coming from email versus SEO versus paid media, and understand which traffic sources correlate with better retention or end up giving you users that have high retention. This is actually an important thing when you're optimizing your acquisition. And this is one area where you see an overlap between acquisition and retention, is that you do not want to judge the performance of acquisition purely on acquisition metrics, but you can also look at retention metrics and judge the performance of acquisition based on that. Because at the end of the day, with acquisition, the thing with acquisition is you can evaluate the performance based on very first touch points or maybe top funnel or mid funnel metrics. But the ideal scenario is that you want to work and scale acquisition channels that are bringing you good users, and good users are ones that retain longer, right? So that's another way to slice the data. Another way is looking at the retention curve by feature use. So let's say within your product, you have multiple features, right? Or maybe multiple sub-products. You might again look at, let's say, Octop in this case. So they're building autonomous AI agents for, let's say, customer support, marketing, sales. You can then look at the companies or the users that deploy these different features. How do they retain compared to each other, right? So the companies that deploy the customer support, let's say, retain better than the ones that deploy the marketing versus sales. Okay, and then dig deeper into that and try to understand what is the problem with these lower retention segments. All right, so a lot of work to be done here when assessing retention. And again, this is one of the ways. There are other ways of looking at retention, but this is kind of like easy, straightforward, like a good starting point to start analyzing retention. All right, now I'd like to ask you guys, what is the current 1 month retention rate of your product? Is it below 10, between 10 20, 20 to 40, more than 40, or you're not sure? You're not tracking it, or you're not sure. Okay, right. So the if your product has been around for, let's say, 6 months or more, and you're not able to answer this question, the first thing you want to do right now is, okay, not right this second, but and then in the following days and weeks, is to try and sort this out basically. So try and first get a product analytics tool. Just be able to measure the retention is a great starting point, because really all of your retention optimizations are going to be based off of these kinds of reports. Okay, awesome. All right, thanks guys for this. Okay, so what are some of the drivers of retention? So now we understand the importance of retention and why it's important and how to measure it. How can we improve it? How can we optimize retention? So research shows that if you look at the initiatives that correlate with retention, that tend to improve retention, or tend to be important drivers for retention, number one is usage, product usage. So the research basically says that you simply just the usage of your product, the more someone uses your product, obviously, the more likely they are to be retained longer. Another factor that comes after that is NPS, right? So the Net Promoter Score. In other words, the how likely a user is to recommend you to someone else. That's a very good indication of retention. So high NPS means most likely would also correlate with high retention. The level of support is another factor. The services that you offer, the training that you might be providing for users. So these are all factors, but really the most important one is usage, right? So we really need to try and grow the usage of our product, and it doesn't have to be the usage of the core functionality of the product, but you can think of adjacent use cases that basically adds value to the overall experience, right? So usage in general seems to be really the important thing. That's why we want to try and focus on that. Okay. All right. So if we look at defining the different stages. Now, by the way, guys, I'm going to get to all the questions on chat during the break. So please feel free to keep sending them. Okay, now, if we look at looking at retention overall and trying to split that into sub-stages and even further sub-stages will help us come up with sorry, help us come up with ways of how to move a user from point A to point B and from point B to point C and point C to point D, etc. Okay. So you can think of this if this is kind of like a spectrum, you have point A is someone just signing up. The last point, the other end of the spectrum, is a loyal customer, right? Someone who's using your product continuously. Okay, so if you guys remember, the retention as an umbrella had three stages. We had activation, engagement, and resurrection. Okay, so let's take activation and further split that into sub stages. Okay, so you can look at activation in three key moments, or let's say three. Yeah, you can call it three key moments or three key sub stages. One is setup moment. Second is aha moment, and third is habit moment. I'm going to start with the aha moment first. I'm going to explain the other two. Okay, so the aha moment, and I'm sure you guys have heard this or have come across it before, is simply the first time that someone experiences the value of your product. Okay, so keep in mind here, we're talking about someone experiencing the value, not just learning about it or hearing it or seeing it, but actually experiencing it. Okay, so for example, a video of the product, if someone watches a video of the product, that's not experiencing the value. That's learning about the value, not actually experiencing it firsthand. Okay, so the aha moment, I'll give you examples for this to solidify the meaning. Okay, so that's your aha moment. The first time someone experiences the value of your product. The habit moment is the first time that someone starts using your product routinely. So the first time that someone creates a habit around using your product. In most cases, the habit moment is the aha moment or a combination of other actions that start taking a routine or start to take the form of a habit. All right. Again, I'll give you examples for that. And the setup moment are the steps or the actions that a user takes before experiencing the aha moment that would set them up to experience the aha moment, right? So the setup moment is basically the actions, the steps that precede the aha moment. And they are necessary for the user to experience the aha moment. Okay, so you kind of like think of it as the kind of like the setup for the aha moment. Okay. All right. Now, so that's the first kind of bucket, activation. The second is engagement. Okay, so engagement is everything that happens after someone reaches the habit moment, and it's basically from that point on, from that point until them basically stopping using your product, right? So engagement is everything that happens, kind of like the ongoing engagement with your product. Okay, and you can split the users there into two or three segments. So let's say core users and power users. You can think of casual users, core users, power users. So this is basically just levels of engagement, like low engagement, medium engagement, high engagement type of thing. Yeah. And you can define that in whatever makes sense for your product. And then finally, the third bucket is resurrection. Right. So resurrection, these are users that have stopped using your product for a period of time. And typically when someone stops using your product, they can either be doing that voluntarily or involuntarily, right? So someone who voluntarily decides to stop using your product, that's someone that has an issue with your product. Either they have an issue with functionality, the features, the price, right? So there's something they've made a conscious decision to stop using a product because it's not providing value anymore, or they don't see the value, right? Involuntary reasons are basically things that happen. The user stopped using a product and it's out of their hand. It's not because they don't like the product or don't like the price, but maybe their credit card is not working, or they relocated, so your product is not valid for them anymore. Whereas these are involuntary reasons. Okay. And finally, churned. You can think of churned as kind of like the long lost users. These are users that have stopped using a product for a long period of time. So you can think of it as kind of like an extended version of a dormant user. Okay. Now, why exactly are we defining all of these? And what's the purpose exactly? The thing is, all of this can be tracked. So practically, you can think of these blue boxes here as segments or kind of like a way of segmentation. So you're segmenting your user base so that at any given point in time, let's say if you have 1,000 users that are using your product, at any given point in time, if you have that level of tracking in place, you should be able to say that out of those 1,000, this 150 are in the setup stage. Those 200 are in the aha moment stage. This section is in the habit. Those guys are our power users. Those guys are our core users. These guys have been dormant. These guys are in the churn phase, right? So the purpose of this is basically to be able to track these users. And this is the first step because then what you want to do next, I'm going to talk about in the next slides, but this is just to tell you that this is not something that you're going to stick on a paper and stick it on the wall and just look at it, right? This is actual tracking of users and segmentation that you would then take action based on. Okay. Okay, so let's take an example here. Let's look at Revly, right? So the use case for Revly here is that you manage promotions on delivery apps. Right? So for me as a restaurant, I can manage my promotions and ads on delivery apps. So let's assume that their retention metric or their North Star metric is daily orders. Okay, so the daily orders that the restaurants are receiving. Let's just assume that's hypothetically the thing. So you can look at let's try and define the activation substages. So setup moment, aha moment, and habit moment. So you could say that the setup moment is whenever a restaurant or a brand has launched their first promotion on Revly. Right. So any user that signs up, the moment they launch their first promotion, now we know that this user has reached the setup moment. The aha moment, let's say in this case, is the brand has received 10 orders in the first week after promotion launch. Right? So when someone reaches that, then we know that they've reached the aha moment. The habit moment is when they launch 4 promotions and receive 40 orders within 28 days. Okay. All right. Now, how do you come up with these definitions? Well, that's an important point because the idea here is that you want to come up with definitions that truly uh, represent the case, right? So basically, when you say that the aha moment is the definition of the aha moment is the first time someone experiences the value of your product, whatever the definition that you're going to come up with, whatever the actions that go in here. So, for example, receive 10 orders in the first week after promotion launch. This definition right here has to be the thing that correlates with long-term retention, or it has to correlate with someone truly experiencing the value. Okay. So how do you know this? Like, how do you come up with this definition? Really, two ways. One is speaking to your customers, asking them. And the second is looking at the data, right? So validating using the data that users that do experience that or that take these actions, they end up staying longer. Okay. So it would be a combination of qualitative and quantitative assessment of that. Okay. Because then you want to know, is it received 10 orders or is it 5 orders or is it 20 orders, 30 orders, right? So the combination of speaking to your customers, but also looking at the data is going to help you fine tune that. Okay. And of course, this is an ongoing tweaking thing. It's not something that's set in stone. You can always tweak that and optimize the definition better. Okay. All right. So going back to the point of tracking all of this, and let's say now you're tracking all of, now you have the definitions, now you have the tracking, and now you have that level of segmentation. So in your product analytics tool, you're able to uh, look at reports that show you the number of users that are in every single one of these stages. So what is the end goal of this? The end goal is that you want over time, and you can have that kind of report that looks similar to that. Every month, you want to try and move people from one stage to the next. right? So over time, you want to move people that were in the setup moment, you want to move them to the aha moment. The ones that are in the aha moment, you want to move them to the habit moments. And then you want to move them to becoming a power user. And the ones that were churning, you want to shrink that. You want to bring them back to engagement. You want to re-engage them, right? And so the way to optimize retention really is to try and push all of your, well, at least not all of them, but a percentage of your, the highest percentage of users possible into these buckets. Now, of course, the ideal scenario is everyone would be in the power users, but it's not realistic, but you want to try and move them all towards the mid to high levels of engagement. Yeah. We're going to talk about how you can do that, but up to this point, what we've done is we understood obviously the importance of retention. We looked at how to measure it and how to have this level of segmentation so you can optimize it. Okay. Now, just before we move on to the levers that you would use to optimize retention, let's first do a quick exercise. I'd like you guys to define the aha moment for your product. Remember again, the definition of the aha moment is the first time that the user experiences the value of your product. All right. Who would like to present their all right. Who would like to present? Anyone?
I can do
Just
it.
gonna pick a random one. Okay, go for it.
So yeah, the first time for us is I think when somebody has tools in their hand, deploys the tools, links it to the software that we're developing, and then gets this aha moment, I'm saving cost and time, because compared to all the projects they've done before, just to see the speed, I think that's really what we're trying to go, because I think that's also where we can bind the customer to us.
Great. Also, and you can track that in a product analytics tool, for example, you can track that action. Okay. Great. Thanks, Sebastian. Let's do one more and then we move on. One more thing, just on that point, Sebastian, is ideally if you're able to give it a time frame for that action to happen, just so that basically that you have a target to aim for in terms of getting that user to reach that action within, let's say, whatever period of time, whatever that may be. But just having that in front of you as a definition of the aha moment will also just force you to get everyone accomplish that within the time frame. All right, let's do one more. Let's try Airmo.
Yeah, it's not fully developed yet, but as far as I understand, it's like it gets like
Mhm.
this. So it
Yeah.
basically depends why it's good, and why you should use it.
Got it. So this is when they
Uh, like maybe you haven't used such tools before, but now you find it useful for your company.
got it. And the quality data comes in the form of, let's say, a report that they see in a dashboard.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So for example, it would be first report viewed, for example, first report that obviously has data that it has been viewed. Okay, so here a couple of questions to ask yourself would be whether just the viewing of the report is enough, or for example, would you also want them, or not want them, but would it be, for example, better to define it as someone interacting on the report? These are just some questions that you want to ask, and also the adding the time frame of when you want the user to reach that point, right? Is it within a month of signing up, or whatever time frame? All right, great. Thanks, thanks, Marina. Thanks everyone for the input. This is great. All right. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about onboarding. And onboarding is really the very first steps that happen after someone signs up. And again, you can see here that and this doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to apply on only day 1 or 3, or some products require a longer onboarding. So it can be for week 1, can be first 2 weeks, it can be the first month. But the initial onboarding, if you're able to improve um, the engagement in these very first instances, this can have an impact on your long-term retention, right? So the thing that you're trying to do really is you're trying to get the biggest chunk of your users who sign up to the aha moment as fast as possible, right? So if you're able to do that, the biggest percentage reaching the aha moment as quickly as possible, this is something that would get you would really improve your long-term retention. Okay? Now the activation, you can think of it as so. Just to clarify the definitions here, onboarding you can think of it as from the moment of signing up to, let's say, reaching the aha moment, right? The activation is when someone reaches the habit moment. So the habit moment is the last step of activation, and this is when someone starts using your product routinely, right? When someone starts creating some form of habit around using your product. And you can think of activation as the link between what your marketing is doing or what your acquisition is doing and your product, right? So the marketing is giving all these promises. You want to get them from there to actually experiencing the value on your product. And activation is the thing that really bridges uh, these two initiatives. Okay, so we spoke a lot about retention in terms of importance, in terms of measurements, of segmentation. Now, what are the things that you're going to use to improve retention? Okay, so we spoke about how you want to move users from sign up to becoming engaged, highly engaged users. You really have 4 levers. Okay, so you have your product, so your product experience. You have notifications, so that would be things like email, sending push, sending SMS, WhatsApp, whatever the notification may be. You have incentives, right? So whether it's some form of discounts or offers. And finally, you have your staff. So your staff can be your customer success, account managers, right? So these are the 4 levers. Now, the thing is, the ideal scenario, and this is the most scalable scenario, is that your product does most of the heavy lifting, right? And product would have the highest impact, right? So if the product experience alone, okay, not alone, obviously, you would have to have a combination of these levers. But if your product experience is the biggest factor in or doing the most of the heavy lifting in terms of activating a user, getting them from the sign up all the way to aha and potentially habit. That's the ideal scenario. Okay, so product should do most of the heavy lifting. Whenever product falls short, your notifications should aid that, right? So things like creating email sequences or onboarding emails or sending push triggered emails or triggered push notifications. All of these things are another lever that would assist your product experience in activating users. Okay. I'm sure you guys have all experienced this when you sign up on a new tool and you start receiving emails from that tool. You don't want to rely only on that. You want to try and make your product the thing that really gets users to that moment. And then you have your people and incentives. I would put people probably before incentives. So this is your customer success team, really. And you'll see also that your customer success team or your staff can play a more important role in some scenarios. So for example, if you're going after enterprise accounts, if you're in B2B and you're going after enterprise accounts, most likely these accounts require more hand-holding, right? So you would need your sales team or your CS team to be more involved, right? Unless you're following a kind of like a product-led growth motion, maybe your product and notifications can play a bigger role, but in most cases with enterprise accounts, you do need more hand-holding. Okay, so these are the 4 levers that you would use to work on your retention. Now, of course, there's a lot of things that we can talk about in terms of what exactly goes into that, but for now, just for the sake of time, I wanted to give you guys, try and cover as much of the fundamentals as possible. Okay, now let's look at the last piece of the first session, the first half, habit loops. If you guys remember in the previous session, we spoke about growth loops in general, and we know that they are split into acquisition loops, loops that basically with the objective of bringing new users, and habit loops. Okay, so habit loops are, you can call them habit, you can call them engagement, you can call them retention. The purpose here is to re-engage existing users. Okay. It also consists of 3 steps, similar to acquisition. The difference is that you have your input, you have your actions and steps, and then finally you have a reward. Okay, so a reward. So remember the last step in acquisition loops, the last step typically is a new user coming into your loop, right? And that new user becomes the input of another loop. But in the case of habit loops, the outcome here is a reward. It's a psychological feeling that the user basically experiences because of that loop. All right, so let's dive deeper into habit loops. With habit loops, you have 2 types of habit loops. You have environmental and you have manufactured. Okay. All right, so manufacture, you can think of it this way. And if I would explain this in plain English in very simple terms, you can think of so I'm gonna try and give you an analogy, and I hope it lands. So let's assume that your users are basically fish in a pond. Okay, so they are fish in a pond. They're swimming in a pond, and you want to somehow capture them. Okay, not capture them because they already signed up. They are already using your product. But let's say you want to bring them back, quote unquote, bring them back. Okay, so again, fish in a pond. So environmental loop, or let's actually start with manufactured. Manufactured loop is that you would throw, you basically try and fish them out of the water. That's a manufactured loop. So you're basically sending something to try and fish them out. Environmental loop is that you yourself will go under the water. Okay, so you're gonna basically come to their environments, wherever that is. And I'm gonna give you a couple examples so that we bring that from a fishing trip to your actual business. But you can think of manufacturing environmental in that sense. That environmental, you are placing yourself in their environment. Manufactured, you are sending something to bring them back to your product. Okay. Okay, let's take an example here. Let's look at Porte. Is that right? Is that how I pronounce it? Porte. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, perfect. So this is very, very basic and straightforward. An example for a manufactured habit loop. Okay. The one where you fish them out. Okay. So here you have a hotel manager that's using Porte, they signed up. Let's say an email is sent out to the hotel manager at the beginning of each week, showing all the upcoming check-ins ordered chronologically. Okay, very simple, straightforward. At the beginning of every week, the hotel manager will receive receive an email showing them all the check-ins and let's say additional things that are related to these check-ins. So the actions here that the hotel manager would log in to the product and they would start assigning tasks to, let's say, housekeeping and other stakeholders that are related here. So the reward then is that the hotel manager feels in control and gets immediate visual clarity for the week. Just as an example, okay? So what we're doing here is that we're reinforcing, we're re-engaging users, but in the process of re-engaging them that way, we're reinforcing that positive psychological feeling inside of it that they are, they're having full clarity and the product is providing value. So kind of re-emphasizing the value that they will be getting from the product. Okay. And then you can measure that on many other things. So let's say if you're a marketing software, one manufactured loop can be that when someone launches a marketing campaign with your software, with your tool, they would receive, let's say, an email once this campaign starts generating some results. Okay, so these are all very small examples of manufactured habit loops. But when you have a variety of those, you're basically continuously reinforcing that, okay, and re-engaging them. Okay, let's look at the second example here. Let's take an example for an environmental habit loop. So let's take Julep as an example. So Julep does kind of ERP-related functions or products for pharmaceuticals. Okay. So let's assume that Julep's customers, some of them use SAP and some of them use Salesforce. Just as an example. Okay. So what you're doing is that you are placing Julep in their environment. Okay. So let's say the Julep user or the customer of Julep, they find the Julep app in SAP or Salesforce, or you as a Julep, as a company, you would inform your new customers that, hey, we have an app inside your Salesforce or inside your SAP, so it's easy for you to use Julep. You don't have to leave your environment. You don't have to leave Salesforce or SAP, and you can still use Julep built into your existing environment. So the user is able to use without having to leave their existing CRM or ERP. And the reward, of course, that the user feels the ease and seamlessness of using Julep in their daily work. Okay. Another example for this is let's say Calendly. So let's say if Calendly creates a Chrome extension, okay, if it creates a Chrome extension, so that when you're on LinkedIn, you can, using that Chrome extension, you can directly send booking links to connections on LinkedIn. That's also an example of an environmental habit loop. They are placing their product inside the environment of the user, which in this case is their browser. Okay. Sorry. So these are just a couple examples. Now, the thing that you want to be doing then when it comes to re-engaging users, especially on the level of notifications, right? So you're sending out emails or push notifications or in-app messages or whatever it may be. You want to try and automate all of that. Okay, so you need some software, some tool that can automate all of these, all of this messaging across different channels, right? So you have tools like Custom.io or Braze or CleverTap or HubSpot or MoonGage. All of these are tools that can help you create these automations or sequences based on these different segments that you have in your product list. So the stuff that we spoke about, like setup, aha, engagement, resurrection, all of that. So I'll give you guys one example for an email, an automated email that was sent, and you can assume that this is under the bucket of resurrection, right? So here in this case, on Audible, let's say I went to my change membership section in my account. So I went to a section in my account where I'm likely to cancel my subscription. So they immediately sent an email showing the credits that are available in my account, right? So these credits are basically the kind of like the money, the Audible money that I can use to buy books. So they immediately send the credits that are available in my account. Okay, so this is very likely a triggered automated email that was sent because I took the action of going to the cancel membership section. And the response to that was a triggered email showing me my credits. All right, so going back to the big picture that we spoke about last time, again, to reiterate on this, because now we've covered both acquisition and retention. Really, the big picture again is you have your linear channels at the top. These are bringing new users. Those are feeding into your acquisition loops, which are also bringing new users. And it's also feeding into your habit loops, which are continuously re-engaging existing users. All right, this will be the end of our first half.